So we've written our entire application. We did React first, then we integrated Redux, and then we did Flow and all that kind of fun stuff. And we're going to kind of take it down the final stretch here and do a couple more build-oriented sort of things. The first thing that we're going to do is universal rendering, also formerly known as isomorphic rendering, also formerly known as a bunch of other really dumb terms. Let's stick with server-side rendering because that's actually what we're going to be doing. We're going to take React, and we're going to take our application, we're going to stick it in Node and say, render this out to a string so that when you go down to the client, you have fully rendered markup. So kind of to demonstrate to you here, if I view page source here, that is 100% of the HTML that I'm sending down to the user, which is nothing, right? It's just the shell that React then bootstraps itself and renders out to the DOM. To be honest with you, this is going to be fine most of the time. Server-side rendering is by no means required, right? However, it's going to improve perceived load time, right? We're playing a psychology game here with our users, right? We want them to think that our web page is as fast as possible, right? So if I send down complete markup, right, the browser will read it, it will render out your markup, and then behind the scenes, React is going to hurry and bootstrap itself and then make your page interactive, right? So it's kind of a game a little bit, right? It's a game in the sense that the user sees the page rendered, and it's not actually interactive yet, right? If they click on the buttons, the JavaScript is not yet there to be interacted with, right? But by the time, hopefully, that the user sees something, makes a decision in their mind as like, I'm going to click on that button, and by the time they actually move the mouse to click on the button, hopefully, by that point, your JavaScript will have downloaded, parsed, attached to all of the DOM, and then it'll be ready to happen. Usually, that's the case, right? So the user thinks that the page is faster, despite the fact that the time to interactive, right, the time that it actually is ready to be clicked on, is going to be about the same, if not even a tiny bit slower, right? Because you're sending down more HTML. React is having to do a little bit more, and all that kind of stuff. So that's what we're going to do. The key here is that this requires Node, right? So if you're writing Rails, right, Rails doesn't really have a way to run JavaScript, at least not directly that I'm aware of, right? Same thing with Java, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, right? So you're going to need Node in here somewhere to be able to do that. So something that a lot of companies will do, so say for example you do have like a Java backend, they'll introduce what we call a Node middle end, or at least that's what I call it. I don't know if other people call it that, but you'll have like a Node middle end, right? So you have this Node server that makes requests to your API server, your Java server, your Rails server. It gets all the information there in the Node middle end. It'll do your server-side rendering for you and then send down complete markup. So that's always a possibility as well. I would say it's pretty common. It also helps if you're just running Node in the first place because that just works. Cool. So I want to tell you that server-side rendering by itself is actually not terribly difficult to do. So if we go to, I'm going to just pull up one of my other repos here, /btholt/ I think it's the ES. I think it's this one. OK, yeah. So if I go to the GitHub project here, I'm just going to show you an example server-side rendering that's a lot more simple than what we're going to do today. So I'll make this larger. So I did this with Koa. You could easily do this with Express. But really, the big key here is 21 and through 24. You just say React DOM server render to string, and then you pass it the React app, right? It's going to go through and render out your app to a string, and then you just put that in a template and you send that down. The end. That's it, right? So React server-side rendering at its most basic is really just that. That is to say, not a whole lot. However, we kind of have a strange issue here that we're doing client-side routing, right? Because we're using React Router. And so the fact that we're using the client-side router introduces a little bit of complexity because we don't have to write the routing code twice. Now, if you're into it, like if you want to, right, you totally can write a server version of the routing, and then you can go and write a separate version of client-side routing and just try and keep those in sync. I'm going to say that's usually a bad idea, right? Because something like I say all the time is like, if something has to be kept in sync, it's always going to fall out of sync. Like that just always happens. It's a really prone to bugs to do it that way. So it's really great if we can make React Router handle both server-side routing and client-side routing. And the answer is you can. That does work.